Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited, and on this episode we are again back to work on our 2011 Ford F-250 Super Duty diesel. And look, I managed to buy myself on eBay a "so you've blown up the bottom end of your Super Duty" kit. So no, I managed to piece together a bunch of different components so we'll be able to build a new engine essentially. I'm using a used block, a used crank, but they're in good shape, so I'll be putting those back together with new bearings, new seals, new gaskets, all of that. But before we get into that, I really want to give a shout out to my parts guy, Rick. Now, I really appreciate this guy because I'm always texting him with random things, asking for a price on this, price on that, availability on this, availability on that. And the reality is he's not getting anything monetarily out of this. He just does it because he's a nice guy. So Rick, really appreciate all your help, all your effort when you're trying to get me some prices. I know I asked for some strange things. So thank you again, Rick, very much. All right, let's get into this engine rebuild. All right, cleaned up the block a little bit and got my new main bearings in there, upper main bearings. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw some assembly lube on there, and thrust washers also in place back here. Once I do that, I can throw the crankshaft back in, make sure to line up my timing marks on my camshaft, and then I can reinstall the main caps and make sure this thing spins smoothly. All right, you guys, well, we're making some progress here. Got the new used block, the new used crankshaft, cleaned up everything, put it together. We got new main bearings, we got new rod bearings. I cleaned up the pistons and rods, put new piston rings on all the pistons. So the short block is pretty much all reassembled now. Now I'm gonna start putting on the oil pan, the oil cooler, all of that. I don't know if I'm going to put the timing cover on yet. I might wait until we put the engine back in the truck. But honestly, I've got a new rear main seal on there, rear cover seal as well. So we're getting there, we're making some progress, and hopefully we'll get this thing back in the truck and start reassembling the top end of the engine today. This engine definitely holds the distinction for being the heaviest oil pan that I have ever had the displeasure to work on. This thing is a tank. So I got to reassemble the oil pan, put the pickup tube back in and the windage tray. Got the new seals ready for the full bottom end. That includes the seals on the pickup tube itself. One thing to remember is when you're putting any sort of a O-ring seal into a machine surface, make sure you lubricate the seal with just engine oil or something like that. Make sure the seal slides in there smoothly. If it goes in dry, first of all, it's gonna be really difficult to try to slip it in there, but more importantly, you could very easily cut the O-ring. So you don't want that. So go ahead and put the new seals on, lubricate them, slip them into place, bolt it down, we'll move on. Yeah, you saw even with the O-ring seals lubricated up, that still took a fair amount of effort to get that to slide up in there. So if you were to try that with it completely dry, good luck with that. All right, so most times in my videos when we're dealing with these little 8mm head bolts, you'll see me using my little electric impact to take those bolts out. Going back in, I like to be a bit more cautious with it. A lot of times I'll run it in very lightly, but when going into an aluminum housing with just these little 8mm head bolts, a lot of times I'll just do them by hand because it's better safe than sorry, because you don't want to accidentally run it in and just snap the bolt head right off. You're in for a really bad day. So again, one of those points where, yeah, it takes a little bit longer to do it by hand, but it still makes good sense. Now, as you can imagine with how much metal went through this motor, I spent a lot of time cleaning both the oil pan, the windage tray, the pickup tube. Actually, the oil pump itself was too badly damaged to reuse, so I had to get another one of those because of how much bits of metal went through it. It was scarred up enough where I didn't feel comfortable using that anymore. So You can rebuild an engine that has had this much metal go through it, but you have to be extraordinarily thorough. And in this case, because I was using a new block and a new crank, I didn't have to be as crazy about that because those were completely separate. But anything that I'm reusing from the original motor, I went through and took a lot of time cleaning it, because you do not want to go through all this work just to miss a spot where you had a bunch of metal sitting in there. It goes right back through your bearings, and then you're right back where you started. Just one point I wanted to mention about this style of oil pan gasket, where the seal itself sits up proud of the sealing surface. So it's kind of a V shape up to it. These are not designed to be used with sealant, okay? Sometimes people get a little nuts with the sealant. The last guy who worked on this thing, he had a field day. He has sealant all over this thing. They're not designed for that. They sit up proud of the surface so that when you bolt them down, it compresses and forms a complete seal. These are designed to seal completely on their own. The only points at which you want to use any kind of sealant on this thing is at the areas of the block where you're making a transition between the iron block itself and the aluminum flanges that go in the front, the rear housing, or on the front timing cover. So this is what I'm talking about. On the block here, you have the steel of the block itself. It transitions to an aluminum sealing surface right here. So there is the potential for these two sealing surfaces to be misaligned with each other. So you're only going to want to run a thin bead of sealer right there, just along the seam. This sealing surface on the oil pan itself will seal no problem. So that little tiny bit of sealer is all that's necessary. So one of the items that I am installing on this engine is a new oil cooler assembly. If you have an engine where metal has gone through it, these coolers love to grab all that metal debris and trap it in there. So definitely, if you have an engine that's had a metal debris issue, change out your cooler assembly. Otherwise, if you don't, that metal is just going to find its way right back into the engine again. Man, that was a serious pain to get all that back in place again. But we're getting there. All right, well, that took longer than expected, but the engine block is finally back in place. Now it's time to reassemble the engine, and honestly, I kind of want to speed this up a little bit, so there's something I've seen other YouTubers do. I really want to give it a try. Let's give it a whirl. Oh, nope, wrong way. I know what the problem is. I used my right hand. Let's switch to the left. All right, back where we started again. Let's give this another try. Ready? Ha-ha! Look at that. That worked like a champ. But I suppose the actual point of this video is to show you guys how it goes together. So let's go back the other direction. Ready? All right, there we go. Back to where we started. Looks like we're gonna have to do this one the long way. Alright, you guys, so you saw me put the cap back on this thing. I went ahead and skipped the rest of the reassembly portion because there's really nothing interesting there, just putting all the components back together again. Now let's see if we can get this thing to fire up. All right, well, I don't mind telling you that I am a little bit nervous on this startup. We just got this thing all the way back together again. I've got oil in it. I don't have any coolant in there right now. I just want to make sure it fires up first. That way, in case if I need to take anything back apart, I don't have to dump all the coolant back out. So just oil in there now. We're gonna crank it over and see if we can't get this thing to start. Something like that. Up. Working the air out of the system. All right, so you guys probably heard on that first fire up that the engine was starting to run a little better, but at idle, it definitely had a whoomp, 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 whoomp. And I thought initially that that was just because there was still some air in the system, but the problem remained after I let it run for a little bit. What I found out was I went ahead and checked the codes on there, and I found that one of my primary 5-volt reference circuits was not reading properly. Therefore, my fuel pressure sensor and my crank sensor were not reading correctly, and that is why it was running that whoomp, whoomp, whoomp at idle. So I had to do some electrical diagnosis. I went ahead and filmed a separate video on that, but what I found was that the crank sensor wires at some point had gotten hot and the wires themselves had melted together. So I had basically a short between circuits, and it was causing my 5-volt reference circuit voltage to drop to 0. Therefore, I couldn't read any of my sensors. So I just did a quick wiring repair on that part of the harness, put that all back together again, soldered, heat shrinked all the connections, rewrapped the wiring harness, reinstalled it. Let's give the truck another shot. That's more like it. All right, so you guys heard the truck sounds good, seems to drive well. I'm gonna go ahead and button up all the other stuff, put the fender liners back in, and we'll take this thing for a drive, see what it does out on the road. All right, we're gonna give this thing a little run here on the road. Ready to go. And 75. Yeah, this thing rips. Definitely quite a bit faster than my 6-liter. I'm not sure what tune it's on right now, if it's still in the stock tune or not, but this thing cruises pretty good. 75. Alright you guys, so there it is, our 2011 Ford F-250. The rebuild is complete. The truck is ready to go on to its new owner. Now I have to say that this was definitely a larger job than I was hoping to do. Having to pull the whole entire motor apart, change out the block and the crank and everything else. Definitely more than I was hoping to get into initially, but the truck runs, drives great now. You saw that. The thing is incredibly powerful, very much so faster and quicker than my 6.0 that has a tuner on it already. I have to say, when this thing really gets into it, one of the neat things about it is that it sounds more like a traditional V8 than it does a diesel when you really romp on the thing. And I think that's because of the injector timing. You don't get that injector rattle like I do with my 6-liter. So the common rail diesel is definitely a nice step up, way more power, and this is going to be a great truck for whoever owns it next. Now in terms of technical skill required, this is definitely not a job that the amateur should take on. This is definitely one of the most technical jobs I've ever done as far as a complete rebuild. These 6.7s, there's a lot to them, there's a lot going on. Once you strip it down to the base engine, then yeah, it's just a normal engine there. But everything that bolts onto it, I think you saw in the video, there's a lot of different components here and everything has to go in the correct order. So it's definitely not something your average do-it-yourselfer is going to do. This is a professional job only, and I would not recommend taking it on unless you have the proper experience. All right, you guys, so that is my side done. Now it's time to hear from you. I'd love to know down in the comments below, what do you think of this build? What do you think what I had to do to it? It was a pretty serious build. Do you guys like that sort of thing? Or would you like to see something a little bit more simple, something more that the average everyday person can do? So I really hope that you enjoyed so far what's happening. And I hope if you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you feel like it, subscribe so you can watch some more. I'm gonna do some simpler builds in the future, but also I'm not gonna shy away from the complex stuff like this either. So if that's something you enjoy, like I said, please consider subscribing. All right, you guys, we'll see you next time on Reignited. Let me know what you thought about what I had to do overall in this thing. Yes? Yeah.
What are you trying to do, film or something?
Yeah.